And part of that recording is looking through the eye and so forth, the divination vessel, to get that divine wisdom, and then to, you know, share it with the querent, share it with the individuals. We looked into the divine vessel, we communicated with the Abosom and Nsamafo, we learned what they had to say, and now we're going to give it to you. We're going to share with you what they have to say. We're going to copy it down, or we're going to put it in some artistic form, put it in the form of a song, ritual prayer, proverbs, kente cloth, regular writing, whatever it is. But once we get the information from the Abosom or Nsamafo, just like once we get the information from the king or queen mother, through the agency of the spokesperson, then we're going to copy it down. Uden, also Ndun, the T with the dot under it, they'll spell like that. It's really the open palm. Udun, to copy, to write. Udunu, an ape god, the copyist of Tahuti. And of course, Udun, an ape god, a friend of the dead. But the ape god, who is the copyist of Tahuti, we said Ma'a Her Cheru, the chief copyist. Udun is the monkey who's the chief copyist. Edun in Yoruba is the name of the monkey who's the son of Orunmila, Ifa, and he's the assistant to the god of wisdom, Ifa, and he learned Ifa himself and began to engage in divination. Same monkey, same divinity, and so forth. Now we want to get into some more detail about this divinity. We're going to go to a specific text that people typically reference. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay. Okay, so what we have in this particular text, if you look at, and you can find this in a number of different books. This one is in Gods of the Egyptians, Volume 1 by Budge, but it's just a translation and transliteration. The actual text that they're translating from is this text right here. And to show you how to get this text, they'll call it the Bremner Wren Papyrus. It's the Nesi-Min papyrus. That's who it was written for. It's in the late period of ancient Kemet, around 300, quote unquote, BCE, 2,300 years ago. This is plate or sheet number, 11. This is right now, of course, this is in the British Museum. If you go to the britishmuseum.org website, you see this is the actual papyrus. If you blow it up on screen, like we try to blow it up on screen, it gets blurry because it's, the pixels aren't big enough. But what you can do is you can go on their site, you can do this for free, enter your email address, they will send you a free digitized copy of this or any other, image that they have on the site. You sign up, you don't have to pay for it. And within a few days, they will send you the digitized copy and it will be much bigger and then you can read it clearly. But this is the actual text that you can get, the actual primary text itself. This is actual papyrus that's been in the British Museum for the past 100+ years. So all these various resources we talk about are free resources. You don't have to pay for anything. Now, and this is the translation and transliteration. So if you've ever heard people talking about the Book of Knowing, the manifestations of Ra, the Book of Knowing, the evolutions of Ra, the creation of the world, and that text that everybody repeats. It's a very important piece because they mention the god Ma'a in this text. Now, we looked at the earliest religious compositions in existence, and we saw the deity, male deity, Ma'a as a male divinity. Then we showed the papyrus Zagreb. We showed the, as well as the image of Ma'a standing in the tomb of Seti with his name next to him, and he's standing in the form of an Afurakani man, male divinity, with his name there. That's during the New Empire and so forth, the book of, the Shat Mduat and so forth. And now, so that was the earliest religious compositions. Then in the New Empire, about 3,500 years ago, and now we're going to the end of the dynastic period, by the time, right around the time the Greeks started coming in, but our people are still holding on to the tradition. About 2,300 years ago, a late period text, and you find the divinity Ma'a once again. So we show those three eras to show that he spans across the entire gamut, from the very beginning, the earliest text, all the way to the end. Then, of course, we showed that Ma'ara in Akan means Allah, and Ma'ara is the name of the monkey who's the one holding the divination bowl. Same God, same deity, same animal totem, and so forth. But the history of the creation of the world, there is two versions of the history of creation in this papyrus, one after the other. So they say the whole thing first, then they repeat it again and add a couple of things along the way. So you've heard many people repeat this if you've listened to people talking about ancient Khanit and Kamit and so forth. So it says the book of knowing the Keperu, or the manifestations or evolutions of Ra, of overthrowing Apep, the words of Neb Er-Jer when he spoke after he had come into being. Neb Er-Jer is a title of Atem, who's the son of Ra as well. And when he talks about, I am he who came into being in the form of Kepra, I was the manifester of what manifested and so forth, that created what came into being. All after my coming into being, many other things that came into being from my mouth. Now, this is a critical piece. Not existed, not. An means not, and sees the two hands showing not, no. Not had come into being. Pet, meaning heaven. Not come into being. Keper means come into being. Ta, which is earth. Not had been created. The things of the earth, plants and creeping things in that place. I raised them up from Nu. The male divinity Nu, the energy within the black substance of space. I raised them from out of Nu, the primeval abyss of energetic water, from a state of inertness, or quote unquote inactivity. See the male with his arms hanging down, a state of inactivity. He said, not found I a place I could stand wherein. I worked illumination, he says a charm, but akut means illumination or wisdom, from my abet, my heart. I laid a foundation. It says, I laid a foundation within or through Ma'a, and I made every attribute. I was alone, not had I spit the form of Shu, not had I emitted Tefnut, not existed another who worked with me. I made a foundation in my heart, my own, and there came into being the multitudes of things which came into being, of the things which came into being, from out of the things which came into being of births, from out of the things which came into being of their births. I had union with my right hand, talking about Asase Neberetepet, the female divinity, which we show that later on. I joined my self-embrace with my Kahibit, my shadow. I poured seed and released seed from my own mouth. I sent forth issue in the form of Shu. I sent forth moisture in the form of Tefnut. Said my father knew they make to be weak my eye behind them. And then he starts talking about the different things that happened. So he connected with Asase Neberetepet. She gave birth to Shu and Tefnut through their embrace. Shu and Tefnut, which is that expansion and contraction, fire and water and so forth, gave birth to Geb and Nut, earth and sky. We talk about the eye leaving and coming back. And then It says, I wept over my members, came into being men and women from the tears which came forth from my eye. And then it keeps going on and talks about the plants that were created and everything else. And then it says, gave birth Shu and Tefnut to Geb and Nut, which is the earth, crust, and sky. Gave birth Geb and Nut or Seb and Nut to Asar, Heru, Kinti, and Maati, Set, Aset, Nebet, from the womb, one after the other of them. They gave birth and they multiplied in this earth. That was version A. So, of course, the important part is that in this text that everybody reads about, that is always quoting when they talk about, you know, in the ancient Kemetic tradition, we talk about the creation of the world and how the creator brought himself into being. And before he did anything, he laid a foundation in Ma'at. And Ma'at was the first one that he created. And after that, he created everything else. But the text does not say Ma'at. The text specifically says Ma'a. And it's a male deity as a determinative. Now, it's shown with the feather, which is a symbol of Ma'a, and the male divinity. Budge even notes that. I remember us seeing that and the first time reading that after hearing so many people talking about you laid a foundation in Ma'at. Then we came across the actual text. And once again, you can order the text, and we've done that. You can order the text through British Museum, you know, .org and get the actual papyrus. But the first time we saw it, we saw that it said Ma'a. Budge remarks on that, but we looked at the text and it says Ma'a. Some were trying to say, well, that feather probably just means Shu, and it's really not, because Shu has the feather just like Ma'a and Ma'at has the feather. He said, I laid a foundation, not found I a place whereupon I could stand. I worked a charm, but really illumination from my heart. I laid a foundation in Ma'a and I made every attribute. I was alone. Not had I spit out the form of Shu, not had I emitted Tefnut. He laid the foundation first, and then he spit out Shu and Tefnut through uniting with Asase Nebet-Hetepet, his right hand, Kefa, which is her title, as it says in the text, Kefa, the great divine hand, and so forth, the right hand of the divinity. He laid the foundation first, then he spit out Shu, then he spit out Tefnut. So for the ones trying to say that rendering is Shu, that's not Shu. Shu hadn't come into being yet, which is clear. Now let's, as a matter of fact, we're going to look at proof of that. This is the rendering for the name Shu, the feather, which is the sh sound because it waves in the air and so forth. The lake, because sh also moves through the water and so forth when you hear water shushing and so forth. So Shu. Different ways to spell it. The lake, the feather with the chick, which is the oo sound. Falcon on the standard showing as a divinity. Sometimes just the feather itself and the deity. Sometimes with the lion and so forth. Sometimes with the solar disc. A number of different ways that Shu is spelled. Then you look at the word, the name Ma'a, the divinity Ma'a. You can see Ma'a, but then he has a feather, which they call the feather of Shu, but it's the feather, it's the ostrich feather. It's part of the name. And the general word Ma'a, to be true, law, real, actual, the sickle with the earth, tongue of earth, the sickle and the plant with the forearm. Another variation is simply the feather by itself, Shu. But there's really Ma'a. The feather makes the shushing sound, but it's not the god Shu. In this rendering, Ma'a is that feather is coming out the head, balancing on the head and so forth. Sometimes Ma'a is rendered simply as the feather. Sometimes it's Ma'a with the feather. Sometimes it's the sickle and the tongue of earth with the feather. Sometimes it's the sickle and the plinth and the arm with the feather and the determinative of the deity. So there's a difference between, so the feather is used for Shu. It's also used for Ma'a as well as Ma'at. But in this particular text, when you look cosmologically, it clearly it's not talking about Shu, because Shu has not yet been created. And he specifically mentions that fact because he says, I laid a foundation within or through Ma'a, and I made attribute every attribute. I was alone, not had I spit out in the form of Shu, and not had I spit out in the form of Tefnu. So Ma'a comes first. Okay, so so that's the case. So let's go to the second piece, and then we're going to prove it even further. We're going to go to part 2, or the version B, as they call it, and see what they say in version B. And this is another mistranslation that you can easily find. So version B, Book of Knowing the Evolutions of Ra, Overthrowing Apep, the words of Nebuchadnezzar, he says basically the same thing with a few things added. I was or became, the creator of what came into being. I came into being in the form of Kepra, coming into being in primeval time. That's a little extra portion saying I came into being in primeval time of the Set Tepi. I came into being in the forms of Kepra, or manifestation. And they keep utilizing that term, I came into being, just talking about manifestation and unfolding of creation. From the Paut, primordial matter, which I made, I produced myself from primordial or primeval matter. Just like he said, he talked about Nu and the primordial energy, saying it a little different. I produced myself from primeval matter. Then he says, my name is Asar, the primeval matter of primeval matter. So Asar, the great black one, was the grandson of Nu and so forth. He was in the primeval matter, and you see Asar with the black body and so forth. That later on is going to be Kamit, or the black soil, Kam, or the great black one, which is the title of Asar, when his body is the black soil and so forth, and his spirit is operating through that. But before even there's an earth or black soil or anything, Asar, as a spirit, is in the primordial blackness with his father Nu and great grandfather Nu and great grandmother Nunet and so forth. Eventually, he'll be coming through. So he's associated with primeval matter before he's born into the world. So when he's talking about Asar associated with the primeval matter of primeval matter, he's talking about that. But that's not the key point. The key point is, and then it says, I've done my will all on this earth. I have spread abroad in it. I raised up my hand. I was alone. Not born were they. Who are they? Not had I spit in the form of Shu, not had I admitted Tefnut. I brought into my mouth my own name, that is to say, a hekau, word of power, a ritual incantation, and even I came into being in the form of the things, which I created, and came into being in the forms of Kepra. So before Shu and Tefnut, he brought into being his own mouth and brought himself into being. I came into being from the primeval matter, coming into being in the multitudes of forms from the beginning, not existed, created things any in this land. I made whatsoever was made. And sometimes he's repeating himself. Just like version A says, I was alone, not existed any other who worked with me in that place. I made what I made therein by the means of the Ba, this Ba which I raised up from out of Nu, once again, from a state of inertness or inactivity. Not found I a place whereupon I could stand. I illuminated from my heart. I laid a foundation from or through. And this time, instead of saying Ma'a, it says head. You see the little face? The face with the ears sticking out. Let me blow that up a little bit. Okay, so in this one, it says, I laid a foundation. Sant means foundation. like foundation of earth, Senk. And Akan Ase means foundation or base. So when we say Meda Ase, meaning I made da lie Ase at your base. Meda Ase meaning I lie down before you, lay at your base. Ase, well, Senk in ancient Khanit and Kamit means a foundation. So, and Asase means earth and so forth. That's a foundation. So Senk, I laid a foundation. Within means within, but then it says this little face with the two ears sticking out is hair, and then the determinative of a deity. So it says Senti, foundation. I have laid a foundation or founded. I have within hair. That's what it should say. The deity is hair, the determinative of a deity. He translates it before me. I laid a foundation before me. But it doesn't say I laid a foundation before me. It says I laid a foundation hair, through hair. Hair is another title of Ma'at. We're going to prove that in 1 second, but let's go back. If it says Senti, Na, hair, and the seated divinity. Now, what does the other side say? This one says, I laid a foundation in Ma'a. Senti na Ma'a. The feather and the seated deity showing it's a male deity. The determinative symbol of a seated divinity means we're talking about a deity here, not just a feather, but a feather with a male seated deity. So it's saying Senti na Ma'a. I have founded within or foundated, or I have laid a foundation, Senti na meaning I have, or me, Senti, laid a foundation, which means within or through Ma'a. Senti na Ma'a. That means I laid a foundation in Ma'a. Now we go to the other piece. And it says the exact same thing. Senti na and actually here it is, Senti na hair, and the symbol of a divinity. The only difference in Senti na hair and Senti na Ma'a is the exact same construction, but hair is the title of the divinity. He translates it as before me because he knows that hair means above and it can mean under and so forth. So he's assuming that means before me. That's a mistranslation. It is the exact same construction as you can see. What he didn't understand is Ma'a is the name of the deity. He got that right in version A. When you have the exact same sentence in version B talking about this exact same thing, I laid a foundation through, instead of saying Ma'a, it says through hair. That's because hair is the name of the deity. So why is the deity called Ma'a in one context and hair in another context? Now we're going to get to the proof of all of that. Now remember, this is a late period text. So we're going to go back to an early pyramid text and prove that. All right. This is the form of the divinity that we're talking about. His name is Ma'a Haf, which is a title of Ma'a, but he's also called Her F Haf. Ma'a Haf and Her F Haf. Haf means, F means him, and Ha means behind. Ma'a Haf means he sees what is behind him. Her Efhaf means his face or his head is behind him. It's the two different titles for the same divinity. As you can see, he's seated. His body is facing forward, but he's looking back. The same Sankofa symbol, the Sankofa bird symbol and so forth. And what that cosmology deals with, you find it in ancient Kemet. That's that Sankofa bird. That cosmological foundation, the Sankofa bird is looking back to the past to grasp information from the past to solve present issues in the present and so forth. Facing forward, but looking back to the ancestral energy, ancestral, source, as well as the source of the Abosom and Nsamafo in the spirit realm, grabbing what we need, the resources spiritually. When we go to divination and so forth, we go back in time and go back to the ancestral realm and so forth, grasp that, and then bring it into the present so we can solve our issues and move forward harmoniously in the future. Sankofa, return, go and grasp. San means return, Ka means go, and Fa means to grasp or take. So he's seated in the same position. And literally his name means that. Ma'al Haf means he sees behind him. Heref Haf means his face is behind him. There are a couple of ways we want to touch on that. First, just for corroboration's sake, if you look at Allen's book on the pyramid text, face behind him, Her F Haf, designation of the celestial ferryman, so called because he faces aft while poling or rowing the ferry boat, also known as sees behind him, Ma'al Haf. And so we'll just go and check that out and see if that's true. Then it says sees behind him, which is Ma'al Haf. Then it says see face behind him. Same thing. Hold on 1 second. Let me check this connection. All right. So now that we can see that, let's go to the, we're going to go to pyramid text right quick. We're going to see what they have to say in the pyramid text. So Ma'al Haf, he who sees behind him, and Heref Haf, he whose face is behind him. That's two different titles of the same divinity. So let's look in the pyramid text of Pepi and what do they have to say about him. It says Hail Ma'al Haf, Hail Her F Haf, same divinity. He's called Ma'al, the earliest religious text in existence, but he's also called Her. Haf just means behind him. Sees behind him, faces behind him. Hail Ma'al, who sees behind him. Hail Her, who sees behind himself. Behold, this Pepi comes as a living being. He brings to you the eye of Heru, the fettered one, which is in the Sekhet canoe, and it is in the eye of Kanim boat that Pepi has brought it. Hail, Hop, Amset, Dwamutef, and Kev Sinuef, the 4 sons of Heru. Pepi brings this eye of Kinnamu boat, which is in the lake of Ka. Hail the deity open you a way for Pepi. Hail the god Kaera, open you a way for this Pepi. Hail the goddess Nekabet, open a way for this Pepi. Homage to you, goddess Nefer, in peace, love this Pepi, and so forth. But they're talking about Ma'ahaf or Herefhaf. Pepi has come to you. He's bringing you the eye of Heru. So Ma'ahaf can take that eye. Ma'a is in the form of the monkey. He's the one that receives the eye, and then he proffers it to Huti. The eye is a divination instrument. But in the ancient text, Ma'a, as Ma'ahaf, Ma'a who sees behind him is also Herefhaf. So if you can see the earliest religious text in existence, the same deity has 2 different titles, Ma'ahaf and Herefhaf. In the late period text, by the time you get near the Greek period, they say, Atim says, in the creation of the world, I laid a foundation within Ma'a, or through the god Ma'a. That's in the first version of the text. The second version of the text, Senti Na Im Her, I laid a foundation through Her. He's not talking about 2 different deities. When he says he laid a foundation through this divinity, and then he made Shu and Tefnut and Geb and Nut and everything else, it's not like when he's saying that at first he laid the foundation through the god Ma'al, but then when he repeated it, he changed his mind and stuck another deity in there. He laid a foundation through a specific divinity, a specific force in nature. Their force in nature is the god Ma'al. And when he's repeating the exact same thing, before he spit out Shu and Tefnut, he laid a foundation through a specific god. Who is the god of the Ntoro he laid a foundation through before he spit out Shu and Tefnut? It is the god Ma'al, who is also called Her. Late period text is the god Ma'al Haf, who's also called Her, F-Haf. Earliest religious text in existence. Unless people know the cosmology, they couldn't make a connection between this text that was written, 4,500 years ago, and then this other text that was written nearly 2,000 years later. But they're talking about the same thing. But let's go even further back than that, because now we want to know what this role of the deity is. We read a portion of it last week. Hail Ferryman, which is the title Ferryman is Chawi, which we read earlier. Thou boatman of Ma'at, or the one who governs the Ma'al boat, the one who transports the souls to Sekhet Aru. This Pepi is Ma'al, not true, but Ma'al, the god Ma'al before heaven and before earth. This Pepi is Ma'al before the island of earth. Pepi swam and arrived at that which is between the thighs of Nut. So he's the divine ferryman. He's called Ma'al. He governs the Ma'al boat. And remember, we said when the sun sets in the west, that's the end of the day, but that is the gateway to the ancestral realm. There is a river that must be crossed, just like in our Akan tradition. When you say you cross the rivers, that means someone has transitioned. Ma'al is in the ferry boat. He's the divine ferryman, Chawi, and Chow is defining that ferry boat and so forth. And he's the one of the Ma'al boat and so forth. And he transports the spirits to the spirit realm. That is his role. The sunset is the dividing point, the balancing point. Sunrise is the balancing point. Spring is the balancing point. Fall is the balancing point. When someone is born, that's one balancing point. They enter the earth through the gateway of the underworld and so forth, the spirit realm. When they transition, that is the other balancing point, and they're going back into the spirit realm. They're leaving the world of the physical world and going back to the spirit realm. Ma'at is in the boat of sunrise, dealing with birth and so forth. Ma'a is dealing with that transition from the physical world to live in the spirit realm. Birth is the opposite of death. You're born, you live in the physical world, you die, you live in the spirit realm as an ancestor and ancestress. Then you're born and you live in the physical world, and you go through the gate of death, and then you live in the spirit realm. Life is continuous. Birth is the opposite of death. Death is the opposite of birth, but life is continuous. Life is not the opposite of death. Life is continuous all the way around, which is very key. So that river that you cross, you get into the boat of the divine ferryman. If you lived in harmony with order, then he will ferry you across to the spirit realm. You can live in the realm of the ancestresses and ancestors harmoniously. If you did not, you'll be repelled by the ancestresses and ancestors. So this is the divine ferryman. Now, before we get into that part of the text, let's look at what the terms actually mean. And then we'll pull it all together. Now, Ma'a, Haf, the ferryman of Alsar and so forth. Head of Haf, the celestial ferryman, the fairy god and so forth. We just read about that in the text. Head means face or head, but it's also the divine with the determinative of a divinity, showing it's a divinity.